I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome to On Watch, everybody, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we take a deep dive behind the headlines and cover stuff that the mainstream media doesn't want you to know about or hear, where we try to recover some lost history and explain the inexplicable. Have a great treat for you today. I'm joined by Dr. Robert Malone. Before we get into the details of our conversation with Dr. Malone, I want to encourage you, whether you're watching us on YouTube or Rumble, to please be sure that you subscribe and hit the bell so that you know when we come up with a new episode. Or if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast on Spotify or any of the other platforms out there, please be sure to subscribe, leave us a rating. Also, email us. Tell us what you want us to do and what you want us to talk about. We've got tons of corruption issues to cover. That's a never-ending source of information for us to provide to you. But today, a real treat. The man who is really the father of, or the founder of, the mRNA technology used in the COVID vaccine and all that has come from that, Dr. Robert Malone, welcome to On Watch.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yes, the government is a gift that keeps on giving.
It is, yeah. And you know, you're a man with a conscience, and you have stepped forward and asked unpleasant questions.
Yeah.
You provided some insightful commentary on things that made folks very nervous, that had them say, well, you know, he's asking tough questions. This is reckless. We can't have this. There were efforts to criticize you, to block you, to ban you, all the usual sort of...
Write me out of history.
Right.
To deny what I actually did,
right,
as documented in patents and papers. That was the first wave. I mean, there's been a bunch of waves of attempts to delegitimize me, and
right,
they continue on daily.
And, you know, I'll point out that in Washington, D.C., this is a very rare thing. There are any number of other people similarly situated as Dr. Malone who would have said, sure, I'll be your number one cheerleader. Just give me a dime for every vaccine, right? You would have been a multi-millionaire on that. But instead, you said, hey, look, I actually know a thing or two about this, and I have some legitimate questions. And these are concerns. And concerns. And these are things we should talk about and caution people on. So, you know, you've been through the ringer. You've been through a lot.
A little bit, and it still goes on. But
yeah,
you know, once you decide to go to follow your conscience or go down this pathway,
right?
And Judicial Watch, of course, this is your story also. It's really the hero's journey. Once you decide to do this, there's no going back.
That's for sure. Yeah, you start asking unpleasant questions, there's no end to it.
And well, exactly. The pit is so deep and broad that you can go on forever. That's kind of become my new job, is as a writer and author together with my wife, with our Substack and with our books.
And so pause for a second and tell people about your Substack and books. Let our viewers and listeners know, hey, if they want to find out more, let's get it right up front. Tell where they can find it.
So we publish a Substack for those that are not in the business or haven't been tuned into Substack. Substack is a San Francisco-based company that's actually run by liberals, progressives, but they are strong free speech advocates. And they've kind of revolutionized journalism and publishing to a large extent, because journalism has become so compromised by a variety of conflicts of interest that a lot of, you know, better journalists, people that have been quite outspoken over time and quite aggressive in their reporting,
right,
have migrated to Substack. And the Substack business model is such that if you get paid subscriptions, you get a lot more of the money than you get from publishing a book even, let alone working as a poor journalist.
Right.
And so people like Matt Taibbi and many others have migrated to that platform because it frees them up to speak, even though it's owned by this small group of investors out of San Francisco, which seems like a paradox today.
Yeah, but you imagine lefties would be suppressing this, but instead they're not.
They appear to be earnestly committed to free speech.
Thank goodness.
And it's become one of the only sources, because all of the social media, including Twitter has talked a big talk about being a free speech platform, but with their new CEO, not so much. They're very much bought in and required to comply with the new European Union guidelines on censorship, and
misinformation, disinformation,
and
right.
malinformation. Right. So Substack is one of the last bastions of publishing freedom in this Western world.
So if I'm sitting at the keyboard and I type in substack.com, how do I find you?
So it's rwmalonemd.substack.com, and we publish daily. We take it very seriously. We treat it like a business, like the consulting business that I used to run.
Right.
That was very customer focused and very attentive to the needs of our customers. Now we have hundreds of thousands of customers, and we can serve all of them, and we do our best to do so. But it's really nice having such a distributed funding base, because we're not dependent on any one person. We don't have big donors.
It's a legitimate grassroots.
It is. It's right. This is not AstroTurf.
Right.
So
which I will add is exactly the way that Judicial Watch is organized. 99.9% of the donations that we get to run this operation are what I call mom and pop donations.
Fantastic.
Somebody reads what we're doing, they like it, they write a check for $50, they send it to us.
Yeah, it sets you free. It
That's
sets
what
you
pays the
free
bills.
to be honest.
Right.
You're not compromised by the interests of this donor or that large donor,
Correct.
et cetera.
Exactly.
And you also don't have the risk that, for instance, the kind of things that happened with Project Veritas recently.
Right.
Where you have some dominant parties that are influencing the nonprofit and can pull the rug out from under if they don't like what you're doing. So rwmalonemd.substack.com, we reach about 500,000 to 1 million a day.
That's great.
And we have we have 310 plus thousand subscribers and about 14,000 paid subscribers. So that's what pays our bills these days.
Excellent.
And the people that work for us. And then the book that's out is Lies My Government Told Me and the Better Future Coming. That's available through all booksellers. It's out of the Skyhorse Publishing Group, which does Bobby Kennedy's books and Ed Dowd's book and many others, and has also taken on the cause of free speech, really, in the publishing world. Been very brave in what they've been willing to publish. And then we're working on 2 other books right now. One is about marriage and traditional marriage. My wife and I are heading up to our 45th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
And the other one is about 5th generation warfare, or PSYOPs, that has been deployed on all of us, this military grade technology that was developed for offshore combat that is now, through the Five Eyes Alliance, been turned on the citizen populations of each of those nations. So the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the United States.
And ironically, all of that is rooted actually in Marxist ideology, right? It's in large part, this psychological operations against the civilian population, has an awful lot of Marxism underneath it.
Absolutely, there's no question. And we're learning more and more about that as people are taking that seriously. What you just said was kind of prohibited speech even a year ago.
Yeah.
And now we have leading voices that are really clarifying and elaborating. People are using terms like American Marxism or the American Maoism, and that wraps into all of the divisional isms with kind of the modern embodiment being woke as a stereotype.
It's a particular specialty of mine, so I appreciate your work on this. I'm looking forward to this 5th generation warfare book. It sounds very interesting.
Thanks.
Let me swing back to sort of current affairs issues just for a second and touch on those. So the public is being mentally conditioned, psychologically conditioned and prepared.
Well put.
For it's coming again.
Yes.
Brace up. Masks, boosters. They're generating fear, so that we get a lot of fear-based decision making. We see it on the horizon, or even it's not even on the horizon. It's a little closer. It's It's a distant
Well,
enemy.
tell
us what
so if you track this, and you said a key word, fear,
Yep.
the weaponization of fear. Fear is a real powerful tool if you want to control populations and their ability to think, because it basically destroys your ability to think rationally. And you, in an environment in which you're surrounded by fear and anxiety, typically people lose their ability to rationally process information, think logically, and they resort back to emotional responses which are easily manipulated.
Yep.
So in the current, just this is important. I know you're a fan of history, and so it's important to give a historical context.
Sure.
Not to lose the audience, hopefully, but
Brace up.
I think this is important. So late spring, early summer, the FDA VRBAC made a decision that for the fall, they needed to have this fall that we're coming into now. The leaves are starting to fall in Virginia. That we needed to have a new booster, a new improved booster. And the problem with anticipating what a new booster for a rapidly evolving respiratory virus might look like, whether it's influenza or SARS-CoV-2, is you basically have to do a crystal ball projection.
Right.
You don't really know what's going to happen because these things are evolving quite rapidly.
Which is also true for the good old-fashioned flu, where they do a high-speed guesstimate.
Yeah, and flu actually has an advantage because flu has a hemispheric characteristic to it, so that the flu strains that are circulating in the southern hemisphere now are likely to be the flu strains that are circulating in the northern hemisphere in 6 months. So it has this episodic hemispheric thing. So you get and then they've built a huge sampling infrastructure, military and otherwise, in the United States, and aligned that with the World Health Organization and the CDC to sample and help predict strains of influenza that are coming up. Flu has another characteristic that makes it different from coronavirus. It has a segmented genome. And so when you have a cell get infected with two different influenza strains, they can reassort. And so this is the famous H5N1 or H7N9 or whatever those are. That's referring to this reassortment of the stranded genome in flu. Fortunately, coronavirus can't do that. It has a single genome, but apparently under the influence of these leaky vaccines, that's the leading hypothesis. This SARS-CoV-2 is evolving much more rapidly than the traditional beta coronavirus viruses that we call the common cold that are circulating. They're also closely related to SARS-CoV-2. Okay, so something's happening with SARS to make it evolve very rapidly. So the geniuses at the FDA VRBAC last late spring, early summer.
So when you say VRBAC, just give the acronym.
VRBAC, Vaccine-Related Biologics Advisory Product Committee. I think that's what it is.
All right.
So they made a prognostication that this fall coming up, the viral threat, would be a isolate that of a given certain sequence that was starting to pop up at the time that had the very ominous name Kraken. So you remember the Kraken?
Of course.
Okay, yeah. And you remember how we've had just huge amounts of dying in the streets and freezer vans full of bodies and the hospitals. No, none of that happened. Okay.
No, it's not 1990.
None of that happened. Okay. But it had a great name. I mean, what a perfect name to scare people with.
Of course.
The Kraken.
Yeah.
Anybody that's read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or seen the Pirates of the Caribbean, they understand what the fearsome Kraken is.
Yep.
So the VRBAC, in its wisdom, decided that we needed to have a booster for Kraken. And unfortunately, Kraken is being outcompeted in particular by a strain that has come to fore and is spreading quite a bit now. I think it's B7 Circe, I think is the name for it, as opposed to Parola. Parola is also kind of dying
Another
back.
name that I've heard. Yep.
But these viruses are actually on two branches away from Kraken. Okay, so if you look at the evolutionary tree, these viruses are all three of these, including Kraken, are all derived from Omicron. And Omicron, you'll recall, was really transformational as opposed to Delta, the bad boy that came before it. Omicron is highly infectious, so it spreads like wildfire and causes very little disease, okay? And so functionally it acted like a live vaccine.
I was going to say,
okay?
Yeah.
And many people predicted it at the time, and in fact that's come to pass. So these are branches off of Omicron, and like Omicron, they are very infectious and don't seem to be associated with much clinical disease.
Which sounds almost like a good thing.
That's a touchy subject, but
that's what I like doing on the
show. One might say that. But you notice that we're not being told that Jill Biden, who's multiply jabbed and multiply boosted and multiply infected, and presumably may be infected by one of these new variants that are circulating that we're being told are such a threat. We have not heard anything about her hospitalization or
I have heard
clinical symptoms.
I've heard a reckless and unfounded rumor that I'd like to repeat.
Which is here we are in D.C., so you're closer to the fire than I am.
Reckless and unfounded rumor. Somebody hypothesized perhaps it was a situation where someone had some plastic surgery done and needed a few days to recover and stay out of the public eye. Hypothetically,
that is reckless and unfounded. I don't know why you would even mention that. I've never heard of anything like that happening with women.
Because sometimes people have stayed out of the public eye if they've had work done.
So in any case, she has a prior history of infection, and she is multiply inoculated with these products, and as are many other people, unfortunately, a disproportionate fraction of the people that are hospitalized or dying with COVID, not necessarily from COVID, are the people that are highly inoculated compared to those that are naturally immune or only had 1 or 2 doses. That is a fact, and it's been observed all over the world. And unfortunately, those data were suppressed in the United States by the CDC and the FDA, and recent document disclosures have come to fore and were covered in the Epoch Times by one of their young reporters that demonstrate that the government has been withholding these data. But we knew that this was the case from data already available from Great Britain and from Canada. So in terms of these new variants that are circulating, the history of what's happened in the media now is that about 3 weeks ago, Scott Gottlieb did an extended segment on Face the Nation. And that, to my eye, watching it, was to a large extent a marketing piece, an advertisement for Pfizer's new boosters. And it had a lot of very much forward-looking statements. Just to provide context, both Pfizer and Moderna market capitalization, that's a fancy way of saying their stock price, has been dropping. And part of the reason is because they're not generating significant revenue in the way they had been from these vaccines, because people are not taking them anymore, including the booster. The booster uptake rate is well below 20% in the United States. So they're not making revenue, and they agreed in partnership with the federal government to produce these new products that they intend to deploy next fall, as does Novavax, which are these Kraken-based boosters. So Mr. Gottlieb, whose claim to fame is that he was the senior bureaucrat at the FDA. I don't think he's done anything else in his career of particular note, but he was the senior bureaucrat at the FDA before he left and joined the board of directors of Pfizer. I'm understanding that he also retains an advisory role for various CIA committees.
It's nice work if you can get it.
Yeah,
I mean it's very convenient.
And he is
a smooth career path there.
Smooth is a great way to express Mr. Gottlieb. He is very skilled at communication. Is he scientifically adroit, or did he do anything technically or scientifically in his career? Not that I'm aware of, but he is clearly a skilled communicator and bureaucrat, and sits on the board of directors of Pfizer, and historically at MSNBC and CNN and many of the other corporate media outlets is usually cited for his prior position at FDA as director, and not usually mentioned as a Pfizer board member, although in this Face the Nation segment they did. And so Scott came out on Face the Nation for an extended segment and made the case that many scientists were very concerned about these new variants, and that Pfizer and Moderna believed that their new boosters would be cross-protective against these, although the data aren't actually in to provide any evidence that that would be the case, so that we would call this in SEC speak a forward-looking statement.
Yep.
And an unsubstantiated forward-looking statement by an officer of the company just to put a stake in it. Not that there'll be any consequences. And so he asserted that there are tests in mice in progress that would show, he anticipates, that these Kraken-based boosters will elicit neutralizing antibodies that will cross-protect against the new strains that are circulating. The problem with that
is that it's very fanciful, and it's
more than that. Okay, it's actually they're using the same words and logic, faulty logic, that they used to justify the vaccines in the first place. You remember all the press that came out with the first round of vaccines was built around the wording of neutralizing antibodies, demonstrating that these would be protective. And yet when Pfizer was confronted in the European Parliament about whether or not they had any data on whether they would actually protect against infection, replication, or spread, they had to acknowledge that they didn't. And the reason they had to acknowledge that is because neutralizing antibodies, very sciencey technical term, neutralizing antibodies. Okay, what that means is that in a basically a test tube type assay. It's actually a large multi-well plate assay that's automatically read, but in a liquid assay on the bench, you can show that if you take these antibodies and add them to the virus, they will block its ability to infect a cultured cell. Okay, that is a long, long way from showing that these antibodies will actually protect you from disease. But it was promoted to the press in the first wave. All this fancy sciencey,
it gives you enough to say something.
Sciencey language, okay, and the press being scientifically illiterate, basically, in immunology, all lapped it up and kind of said, oh yeah, that sounds really important.
Also operating from fear, they're grasping at any straw put before them.
And so this was the strategy that was used to justify the initial inoculations that have been proven to not prevent infection, replication, spread, not prevent disease and not prevent death. All of those statements are true.
Yep.
Okay, verifiably true, even though the Washington Post called me a liar for saying them. But we're now accepted as facts. Okay, they're using the same logic. Scott Gottlieb is deploying the same logic starting 3 weeks ago. And this is what kicked off the whole wave of promotion, really, marketing, aimed, I suggest, at improving uptake of these federally pre-purchased booster vaccines that are going to be deployed in the fall. And again, just to wrap up, neutralizing antibodies are not a proven correlate of protection. There are no laboratory correlates of protection. So anytime any scientist said, we did this test in the laboratory, and we think it means that these vaccine products are going to protect you from disease, your meter ought to start flashing, okay? Liar, liar, liar. Because if they're worth their salt, as vaccinologists and immunologists, they know that none of these are validated correlates of protection. They are misleading you intentionally when they use those words and make those kinds of implications. The same is true for the FDA, the CDC, and the pharmaceutical industry. If they make these forward-looking statements that this laboratory test will predict that this product will be effective against this virus, in the case of SARS-CoV-2, they are lying. There is no correlate of protection that's been validated, full stop. Okay, so that's an important thing, I think, to see through the press, the haze of the promotion that's going on right now.
Well, there's a lot of hysteria wrapped up in it, and a lot of, as you mentioned, sort of the pseudoscientific language, which sounds like, hey, this sounds like it's good stuff.
Yeah.
But when you pause and parse out the sentence,
it's garbage.
Right.
It doesn't demonstrate that which they assert it does.
So what's your take on this? I've only seen a couple of stories on it, but the notion that they're going to create sort of an aerosol version of a vaccine, and you get inoculated whether you want it to be or not.
Right. So that's kind of in the same compartment as some of the Bill Gates advocacy for insect vectored vaccines that has been discussed. If you think it through, this is absolutely possible. Okay, technically, it is absolutely possible. We just discussed it. It is in the natural sense. Omicron acts as such a vaccine, right? It spreads, everybody gets infected, they don't get particularly bad disease. So if somebody had intentionally engineered Omicron, we would call it a live attenuated vaccine. And there are many very effective or relatively effective live attenuated vaccines. Yellow fever is a notable example. The Salk polio vaccine is a live attenuated vaccine. Mm-hmm. The traditional smallpox vaccines are live attenuated vaccines. They're weakened viruses that when I give you that jab, you get a little version of the disease, and one hopes that you don't have an immunodeficiency or some other quirk in your body, so that suddenly that thing that normally can't replicate very well in your body is able to cause real disease, or it could revert, as is the case with the Salk vaccine, where almost all cases of polio in the United States since 1960, since that was deployed actually in the mid-50s, have been vaccine-induced polio because of reversion of the Salk vaccine to a wild-type polio virus by mutation. Okay, so live attenuated vaccines are absolutely a thing. They are the closest thing to natural immunity because they actually infect your body. And all the proteins of the virus get produced. Only some of them are kind of crippled a little bit genetically. So that's all by way of saying the technology is absolutely feasible. It would be absolutely possible to generate a infectious, especially for a respiratory virus, an infectious live attenuated vaccine. Now, are there other, because you said a couple of things in that. You talked about basically a mucosal vaccine because you talked about the nose. And your audience knows about a mucosal vaccine, whether or not they know it, whether or not they're aware of it, that's produced initially here in the Maryland area by a company called MedImmune, and it's called FluMist. Okay, FluMist is actually a cold-adapted, because your nose has a lower temperature than the rest of your body.
Right.
So it's cold-adapted, live attenuated influenza. Okay, so when you get that little squirt up your nose, or your child does, if they take the FluMist product, they're getting a cold-adapted, live attenuated influenza vaccine. They're getting a little bit of influenza replicating in their nose, and it pretty much stays in their nose because if it goes into their body, the body temperature is higher than the nose temperature, and that makes it so it can't replicate. That's how that tech works. So could a live attenuated coronavirus vaccine be developed? Well, in fact, the existing coronavirus for cattle, I believe, is an attenuated coronavirus that is given, as I recall, intranasally. It's given mucosally in cattle. So is it possible? Absolutely.
Sure.
Could it be possible that it could replicate? Well, one of the problems with FluMist is you have to be kind of careful. And it was one of the things the FDA was very concerned about, is whether or not with any kind of frequency, other people would get infected by the FluMist that was inoculated into little Johnny's nose.
Right.
But I think they kind of figured out that it doesn't happen very frequently because it's pretty weak. And if it does, not that much of a problem. So that's all by way of saying technically what you're describing is feasible. The thing about designing something, let's say you and I, we're going to set up Judicial Watch Biotech, and we're going to produce a Omicron Plus, okay? And this is going to be a vaccine which is attenuated for disease, which Omicron is, compared to Delta.
Right.
Okay, and is going to spread from person to person so that it goes all around the globe and gives everybody natural immunity, which, by the way, they'll already have because of Omicron. Okay, but we could technically do that, and we would run into a blizzard unless we had enormous pull with certain influential persons. We would run.
Well, it's Washington, so that just means writing a check.
We would run into a blizzard of concern because what you're talking about is completely eliminating informed consent. Not that it hasn't already been
That's
eliminated.
right where I was going to. Informed consent. People should be reminded, informed consent means you know what the hell is going on and you make a fully informed decision.
Well, that's a short way of putting it. Or another way to say it is that you're fully informed of the risks and benefits and alternatives. That's another key point to informed consent.
Right. You don't have to do this. We can go this way. Right? You could find yourself a good doc, boost your vitamin D levels to the appropriate level, and make sure that you have early treatment. For example, let's say if you were a high-risk person, an elderly person with diabetes, just to take a high-risk compartment. Very common group.
You should have the option to have access to medical care with early treatment. And appropriate monitoring, not over-testing, but appropriate levels of monitoring so that if you developed symptoms, you could determine whether or not you had a threatening coronavirus infection and go to your doc and get some medicines that would prevent this or reduce the risk. Or you could take a vaccine product. And in a true informed consent environment, you would have, instead of these package inserts that are big and blank,
the size of this table,
and they say this is left intentionally blank, which is what has been going on. You would get a document like you would find in any box of antibiotics or a flu vaccine or anything else, and you would find it online as a PDF.
Right.
It would say, hey, here's the nature of the product, here's the contents of the product, here's how it's manufactured, here's how the testing went for the manufacturing, here's how the clinical trials went, these were the preclinical studies that were done, this is what they found. All those things that folks like Judicial Watch have been having to scrape out of people through amazing legal contortions, normally would just be on a piece of paper. And somebody could read that and they could say, oh, okay, hey, you know what? I see there's risks here of myocarditis and pericarditis and various other things, blood clots, et cetera. But I'm so afraid of this virus that I'm going to go ahead and take those risks. I think that early treatment is bunk, and I just want to get it over with, one and done, take the jab and be done with it. That would be true informed consent. We have prohibited, basically, people from being able to obtain that. Why is bizarre. But that has been the established norm, and it's written into the Code of Federal Regulations as the common rule, that particularly for clinical research, this would be the case. But then over the last decade and a half or so, a number of very clever bypass options have been written into the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Act and some of the other legislative actions that have been taken around the domain of biodefense that have created outs, exceptions. Just like there is an exception in U.S. policy concerning PSYOPs, basically, that's written in that says that the military in the PSYOPs manual of 2010 that describes the military's PSYOPs approach and capabilities, signed off by the current head of Department of Defense.
Lloyd Austin.
Lloyd Austin, I think, is the one that signed it in 2010. It has a backdoor clause that none of this stuff can be deployed against civilians in the United States, except if there's a national emergency. And in that case, then it's allowable for the DoD and the intelligence community to deploy their full spectrum of PSYOPs capabilities against the American people. Likewise, there have been clauses written in that all of these norms of clinical research, safety, bioethics, informed consent can all be suspended in the event that there's a declared national emergency. Now, this is one of the big paradoxes about the whole push and the fear going on about this fall.
And that is precisely the problem, is John Q. Citizen, not somebody who's on the bi-coastal elite or somebody who's affiliated with some agency or they don't have, multiple degrees or whatever. Just an ordinary citizen, small business owner, a mom taking care of kids. They look at this whole thing and they don't know what to believe. They know they don't want to get sick and they don't want family members sick.
Or dying.
Or they get sick, it's no big deal, but they can't go see grandma because they're afraid because she has multiple backgrounds.
Or Jimmy can't go to school.
Right. And so they sit there and say, what the hell are we going to do? I mean, we don't know who to believe or trust. The information they do give us, we think they're lying. So even that, we can't rely upon. So, that is the crux that people find themselves.
The ones that I feel most sorry for are the young parents.
Yes.
I've raised, Jill and I, my wife and I have raised two kids, two boys, and we're very proud of them and what they've done with their lives. They're married and employed and all that kind of stuff. And we kind of forgotten how hard it is to be a young parent.
Right.
In our 60s now. And the other day we went and visited our older son and our two grandchildren, his wife and the two grandchildren. And my God, they are working hard. They are full-time running herd on this 2-year-old and this 4-year-old. It is hard work being a young parent. And on top of all that, this just breaks my heart. Young parents now that are conscientious, which is to say most, if you have children, I think, face this paradox of what do I do about vaccinating my child? And they basically have two options. Trust the government. That's become more and more untenable over the last 3 years as things have been
well, they've been lied to over and over again.
Over and
and
over
there's
and
so much contention over basic facts.
And then, we have turtles all the way down and the problems with the vaccine safety for all the childhood vaccination schedule. And the vaccination schedule has gotten enormous.
Yes.
And kids are newborns are subjected to these highly inflammatory products. And there is correlative data epidemiologically about a number of syndromes, and I'm not going to go there here, but the audience is well aware of the whole controversy about vaccines and a variety of childhood illnesses and long-term consequences, including impacts on mental health. And what's a young parent to do? Because they kind of face two choices. They can go along with the government and just accept, which is to say, go along with what their pediatrician is telling them. And what they don't know is that at least about half of the revenue that pediatricians make are rewards that they get for vaccinating children.
Right. They're incentivized. There's a bonus
Big
schedule.
time.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So we did a discovery on this in our little group and published it on the Substack. We obtained documents from Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield about the incentive programs, and then we did back calculations concerning the average number of patients carried by an Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Health primary care physician. And when you run the numbers with their financial incentive programs, because it's stepped, if you only get half of your patients vaccinated, then you get this much per patient.
Right.
And if you get 80% of them vaccinated, you get this much per patient. Basically, it tops out about $350,000 a year. That's not small money.
I was going to say, that's a nice chunk of change.
As incentives for
right.
pushing vaccines. Exactly right. For marketing vaccines.
Right.
This is really what it is marketing vaccines.
I'll tell you a little story, Judicial Watch work we did. This is way back when. So Merck gets knocked in the head over Vioxx, and they come up with this brilliant idea of, well, we need another revenue stream. And somebody very smart on their staff said, well, let's let the government be the enforcement agent to make sure our product gets sold. And what do they come up with? Gardasil, right?
Right.
And you're supposed to believe that people are dropping dead on street corners from papillomavirus, which is not true, right? Mm-hmm. But they dream up Gardasil.
Yeah, I remember when all that happened, and then there was the encephalitis vaccines that the quality adjusted life year cost benefit analysis at the CDC VRBAC, vaccine related that's the FDA one, the CDC ACIP determined that it really wasn't cost effective. And so what happened was the pharmaceutical sponsor had a couple of parents come in and they gave a slideshow to the ACIP talking about the personal tragedy of this parent and that parent with their child that had contracted meningitis and died. And that turned the tide, and ACIP voted for it. And what most people don't understand is that the Vaccines for Children program that the Congress has approved is, I believe, the only program that doesn't have ongoing congressional oversight for spending. So once that program was approved, the policy is that this civilian advisory group at the CDC, if their advice that a given vaccine is appropriate for use in children, if they make that determination, and the director of the CDC signs off on it, and CDC is incentivized to do so,
right?
Then there will be an automatic purchase, marketing, and distribution of that vaccine throughout the United States children. Okay, so that's the Vaccines for Children program, and it is a direct pipeline into the federal budget for purchase marketing and distribution of any vaccine that gets approved for use in children by the ACIP. And that's the way the world is, okay? And that is, and by the way, what happens, an answer, as if that's not good enough,
right.
We're gonna make it even better. Here's what we're gonna do. If you grab that brass ring, you basically obtain, as a pharmaceutical sponsor, that's the technical term for the people that make it, you get indemnity. So what you get, the brass ring you get, if you get this through this commission made up largely of academics who are influenced by who they get money from, okay, and have done a very poor job, well-documented, very poor job at disclosing conflict of interest. They define conflict of interest very narrowly, okay, is that if you can get your product navigated through this process, then the federal government becomes your sole source. You sell to them or to their approved distributors. They market it for you. They distribute it for you. And they provide you legal indemnification in case there's any problems. And you pay a small amount to a vaccine compensation fund. But
the revenue stream is unlimited.
It is, okay, then it gets even better, okay? It's a permanent cash cow because so you are granted a virtual monopoly in perpetuity, okay? Because once there is a licensed vaccine for an indication, then any newcomer that wants to enter that market space, any competitor that has a better product, a cleaner manufacturing process, whatever, has to demonstrate that their product is superior in one way or another to your product, either safety or effectiveness, okay? Once you have something that has some degree of effectiveness in the infectious disease space, then it becomes statistically very, very difficult, which equates to lots of money and time.
Right, to get in on that.
Okay,
right.
to demonstrate that yours is better than that one, okay? And so functionally, you're granted a monopoly in that space in perpetuity because, once it's in the vaccine schedule for children, nobody ever looks back and says, oh, no, we need to have more polio, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
And this is the thing, not to pump Bobby Kennedy, but he is correct, technically, in my opinion, as is Del Bigtree, that, as is the book Turtles All the Way Down, that what's happened in the vaccines for children space is a curious situation where the early childhood vaccines were basically grandfathered in because they were built mid-century, mid-20th century, to standards that no longer exist, that are grossly outdated, with very small study samples akin to the 20
right.
that you mentioned that were used to justify these new boosters. And once those are licensed, then the logic has been that each new vaccine, in terms of its safety, needs to be compared to those that were already grandfathered in. So none of these vaccines really have true placebo controls. So what we have in terms of the risk profile, and risk benefit is everything here, is very skewed data saying that this risk is, for this new product, is not substantially different than the comparator vaccine that we administered in the control group in this clinical trial, okay? Now, whether or not that comparator vaccine was truly safe is unknown because it's been grandfathered in historically.
Yeah, it's a false comparison. I'll say that there's things I agree with him on, there's things I don't, but I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has done yeoman's work in trying to bring this up as an issue because they attack him and say he's anti-vax, which is a lie, much as they attack you. Oh, it's just a smear campaign.
I'm the anti-vax vaccine specialist.
Right. So It's just no. In fact, I heard him respond back. He goes, no, I just want safe vaccines. What's wrong with safe vaccines, right? I mean, that's, I saw a couple of interviews with him. And that's what he points to. He goes, there's no real safety tests or evaluations that have been done.
Or the safety, I think it's more to be fair, because we try to be fair and balanced here, is that to the extent that we have safety information, it's not rigorous.
Right.
And it has an intrinsic bias that makes it so that it is less useful and reliable than we would like. And going back to the poor young couple or parents with their newborn or young child having to make this decision, they call me all the time and write to me and seek my counsel. And I have to tell them there is no simple answer here. You have two choices. You can basically concede to the government the responsibility for assessing whether this product is indicated and safe and effective.
Right.
Or you can assume that responsibility yourself. So these young parents who are not, MDs, they're not, and MDs basically are not trained in vaccinology.
Sure.
So they're faced with this enormous decision. And either way they can lose. They can say, no, I'm going to defer this vaccine, or I'm not going to have my children take this vaccine, or I'm not going to take it in pregnancy. And they could have the bad thing happen statistically. Okay, and then they're going to hate themselves the rest of their life because they made the wrong decision. Or they can make the decision to go ahead and take the product, and their child might have an adverse event associated with that. And then they hate themselves for that.
Sure.
They're in a real pickle.
Yep.
But what I counsel with this is intrinsically the challenge of being a free, independent person. If you really are committed to being to loving freedom and personal autonomy, this is the world you live in, where your every action has potential consequences, and you will have to live with them. And most people don't want that. Most people want to be told what to do. There's only about 10 to 15% of the population that really wants freedom. Thank God.
Yeah, or at least what we talked about a moment ago, informed consent.
Yeah.
Lay out all the facts in front of me, show me alternatives, then I'll make the decision.
Yeah.
But if you're not going to give me all true information and all of it, and let me make an informed decision, well then, that's the problem that we're in, right? Because people, they don't believe that what they're getting is even true.
It stems from the fact that most people want to be told what to do. That's how we got here.
Yeah.
Is most people were quite happy to have the federal government tell them what to do. And now suddenly a subset have woken up and said, holy moly,
wait a minute.
We can't trust the government anymore. Oh no, what are we going to do?
Right. That's exactly. So with framing that up, I'd like to kind of move towards a conclusion with you, and just, so I'm almost restating what we just discussed, but we're marching into this next season where they're already hyping, masking up, COVID boosters.
Oh, and by the way, let me interrupt you. Why is it a season? You ever think about that? Why do we have flu season and coronavirus season?
Yeah, please. Okay. Yeah.
So there's some great data out of the UK. If you look at vitamin D levels, they go up with the summer and come down with the winter, particularly in the UK, because they don't have a whole lot of sunlight in the winter. They don't have much in the summer either. But
also true. Yeah.
Okay. Natural vitamin D levels, which have clearly been shown to be essential immunologically for resistance to a variety of pathogens, including respiratory viruses, they fluctuate seasonally. And it's always been a mystery to me as a physician and a vaccinologist and an infectious disease wonk. Why do you see these seasonal fluctuations, particularly in respiratory viruses? And it just so happens, correlation is not causation, doesn't prove it, but the seasonal fluctuations in vitamin D almost completely coincide with the seasonal fluctuations in these respiratory infections. So there's that. And on top of that, the data are clear. If your vitamin D levels are in the right range, in the healthy range, you are highly resistant compared to those that have low vitamin D levels to respiratory viruses. Mm-hmm. So that seems to be why we're heading into a flu and coronavirus season, right, is because people's vitamin D levels go down as the sun fades away.
Right.
Now carry on.
No, but I was just going to say, so as we go into this, and it's already being manipulated, and Biden's already talked about, making people...
Oh, MSNBC is all in.
Right. So, not your family members, but your family members' friends. What are they supposed to do? It's tough to give generic advice, but how do you approach this? How do you think about this? Because there's going to be a drumbeat. There's going to be pressure.
And so I've put out 2 Substacks that talk about this specifically. Okay, one is on the Parola variant, and one's on this EG5 variant.
Good.
And I go through. I get a little snarky on the latest one.
Good.
About Scott and the press and all that, but it lays out a lot of these same points that we've been discussing with a lot more detail about the fact that, for instance, we're currently running at about 40 deaths per day, United States, border to border, coronavirus-associated deaths. That compares to fentanyl and opioid daily death rate in the 200 to 300.
Easily.
Okay.
Yep. The way I compare it is they're crashing a 737 filled with people 18 to 45 every day. With
opioids.
That's the fentanyl death.
Yeah.
Right?
Well put.
So,
well put.
So if you're willing to have a 737 crash with young people every day, and you're not going to do anything about it,
why are you so wound up over 40? It's coronavirus-associated deaths. So those might have been people that were on death's door anyhow,
and all kinds of
or
other
got
conditions.
A gunshot or car wreck or whatever else. Right. Okay, and the baseline rate of a coronavirus infection, daily infection rate in the United States, has in fact doubled. Oh my God, it's doubled. It's gone from about 7,000 a day to a little under 14,000 a day. Okay. That is a tiny little blip if you look at the tracing of coronavirus, of SARS-CoV-2 infections over the last 3 years. It's a 100% boost off of what is functionally almost nothing. Okay?
And the recovery rate is up at close to 99%.
Yeah.
If you get it, 99% of people walk away from it.
Especially if they have, even if they're in high-risk groups, if they have access to early treatment.
And they say, boy, that was miserable, but I feel better now, and it's over with.
Yeah, it is very much like the flu now, particularly with these Omicron-related strains. So it's not the extinction boundary threat that it was stoked up to be.
Right.
Just like climate change is stoked up as an extinction level boundary event, just like food supply and energy. I mean, we're hearing this constant drumbeat of, oh my God, we could all be dead if we don't do this, right?
Correct.
The Greta Thunberg statements are notorious. So in the face of that, the truth is, if you look at the data, that we are not facing a major wave of death and disease this fall, unless something radically changes. Well, it could, but right now there's no evidence of it. There's also no evidence that these boosters will have any impact on the currently circulating variants, the EG5. So what can you do? What's a person to do? My advice is get your vitamin D levels checked. Find a doc that will help you with that, get you in the right range. Eat well, lose weight.
Exercise.
Okay? Exercise. Spend some time outside. Don't succumb to fear. Fear actually damages your immune response. Okay, that's the paradox of all the fear that the press has been spreading, is they've actually made it worse for people for no good reason at all. And find a doctor that is willing and able and experienced in providing early treatment for COVID. And work with them. Make sure they're on your speed dial.
Right.
And if you learn, we all pretty much know what the symptoms are of SARS-CoV-2 infection because we've all had it at this point. Virtually everybody in the United States has had a SARS-CoV-2 infection.
Right.
So we know what the symptoms are like. We know what they're like for you personally. And if you are in a high-risk group or concerned, or you have to maintain your job daily, and you want to minimize time off for an infectious disease, make sure you find a doc who is skilled and experienced in providing early treatment. And, consider, I think there's a problem with over-testing. But beyond that, at the personal level, having an antigen test is not a bad thing. And if you start to feel flu-like symptoms and you do a swab and it comes back positive on that little stick, like a pregnancy test, well, time to go call up that doc that's on your speed dial and say, hey, doc, it looks like I may have this. I'm starting to have these symptoms. What can you do for me? And he's going to say, hey, here's my protocol. I think you should take X, Y, and Z. And I'm not going to tell you what he's going to say.
Sure.
But he'll come up with something. And you may have a bad case of it. A friend of mine had his first case of COVID just 3 weeks ago, and he got the ocular infection. So he got infected in his eye. And he had a lot of edema and swelling coming into his face. And I sent him to my doc, who's a local Rappahannock County physician, country doc in Little Washington. Mm-hmm. And he went to visit him, and he got some steroids and some other drugs. And I followed up with him the day later, and he said, oh, it's like a miracle. I can't believe how quickly that resolved. And I'm feeling all better. And here's a picture of my face. And it's no longer swollen. Yay, okay. And that's the responsible way to handle it. It's kind of old school, right? Back when physicians would actually take care of patients and would just blindly follow hospital protocols.
Right.
But I think that is the way forward, even if you're in these high-risk groups. The problem, and I got this question the other day on a podcast, it's the hardest question of all. Dr. Malone, do you advise that high-risk patients take these boosters? Okay, that's like answering the have you stopped beating your wife question.
Depends on the situation.
There's no good answer to that one, okay?
What is the underlying, there's a whole medical history. Yeah.
There's no good way to answer that. But I think it's safe to say, even if you're in the high-risk groups, know your own medical history, find a doc who's experienced and willing, and communicate with them. Don't hide it. It's not a sin to become infected with this thing. Don't hide it. Don't feel ashamed. Just get early treatment. And the data shows that you'll be fine.
Exactly. Dr. Robert Malone, thank you so much for your time and for your insights and for a wonderfully frank conversation about all the craziness of the alphabet agencies and what they're doing. It's a disservice to our country. You've been very brave, very forthright.
Thanks. You've
been really the public's conscience on this issue. And it's subjected to a lot of BS, really, that nobody deserves.
It goes on daily.
Yeah. But thank you very much for joining us on Watch. It was wonderful of you to take the time to talk to us about all this.
I'm glad to do it, and I have deep respect for what Judicial Watch has done. You guys have played a key role in bringing truth and light into this situation all the way through the last 3 years.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chris Farrell on Watch.